You're listening to the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse at bellydancegeek.com.
Hello, everybody. This is Nadira Jamal, and welcome to episode 55 of the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse. The Clubhouse is a place where dancers can get together and geek out on all of those things that are hard to get in classes and on DVDs. If you want help with the what, so things like moves and combos and choreographies, it's really easy to find resources. But if you want to dig into the why and the how, so things like business, culture, composition, ethics, musicality, that's trickier to find. So every month I interview a different guest expert on a different geeky topic, and we always have time for you to ask questions so you can geek out too. So if you think that knowledge and creativity go together like chocolate and peanut butter, you are in the right place. And this episode tonight is being sponsored by the Belly Dance Bundle, which is a heavily discounted bundle of amazing belly dance products from dancers around the world. They're all online and all available to work through at your own pace. I'm one of the contributors, and so are a lot of the previous Clubhouse guests. If you're interested and you happen to be listening to this in time, you may want to check out the giveaway that they're running right now for 8 sets of finger cymbals from Turquoise International, as well as a first copy of my revamped online program, Lace. For that one, you have to sign up by Wednesday, September 27th at midnight Eastern Time. That's available at bellydancegeek.com/ZIL-giveaway. Or if you're listening later on, just check out at bellydancegeek.com/bundle. My guest tonight is Shahrzad. She's a full-time dancer from the USA, specializing in rocks Sharky and regional styles of dance from North Africa and the Middle East. She's currently based in Cairo and tours internationally to teach and perform. You can check out her website at shahrzadrocks.com. That's SHAHRZADRAQS.com, or on Facebook at facebook.com/ShahrzadDancer. So welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you today.
I'm
All right.
excited to be talking to you.
Awesome. So today, Shahrzad's going to be talking about the complicated interplay between markets, audiences, and professional dancers. And this is vaguely related to an episode that we did really early on. I think it was episode 9, where we had Julie Eason talking about the professional spectrum and the different ways that there are to be a professional dancer. But in that episode, we focused more on kind of the aspects of marketing and building your business. And today we're going to be focusing more on how it affects the art form itself and the artist. So both how your dancing develops, how the dance develops, and how the community grows. So before we get started, I always like to ask my guests about their origin stories. So Shahrzad, can you tell us about how you got started in belly dance?
Yes, sure. It's been a long history. So I will try to give a pretty abbreviated version so I don't eat up a lot of time, okay? I have had the privilege and the really unique experience of never having another job other than dance. I started taking classes in belly dance when I was around 11 or 12 years old. I was exposed to it first on TV. I clearly remember it was a commercial for Vina and Nina belly dance videos, and I don't know what it was that like went off in my like preteen mind. I was like, this is it. This is great. I'm gonna do this and it's gonna be awesome. So I was like, Mom, you have to buy me these videos. So she bought the videos, and it was like 3 different videos in the package, just like belly dance workouts, general stuff. But I loved it. And it came with a CD, and I could not stop listening to the music, and I just had the best time. So I started asking her for actual in-person classes, and she knew that there was like a local restaurant that had dancers, so she called them up and found one of the local teachers named Maya. That was my first lady that I took class with, and we showed up, and here I was. I was always a giant child because I'm very tall. I showed up, and it was me, this awkward giant child, and a bunch of middle-aged women. So my mom was like, I'm going to take this class. This sounds fun. So we actually started together because my mom would drive me to the classes anyway. From there, it was just nonstop, I guess. I moved up in the class levels really quickly because I would just practice all the time. And I got really into the local community, going to different haflas and going to class with different teachers and different styles, trying like tribal, trying American cabaret, and trying Egyptian stuff. But when I did start to get exposed to the Egyptian stuff, like that's what I got really into, the folklore and the Egyptian styling of Oriental dance. So my first exposure to that would be with Habiba of Philadelphia. Was the first time I really got like folklore type training for Egyptian dance, and I loved it. So anyway, after bumping around to a bunch of different teachers and starting to take more workshops with like quote unquote bigger name teachers, I was getting into my late teens, and that's when I started performing professionally. I started performing first around 17 years old in like restaurants and stuff. And around that time, I did teach a few like really casual classes, but I was spending a lot more time performing in like the Philadelphia area since that's where I grew up. And then pretty quickly after that, I moved up to New York City and started performing full time in the live music nightclub scene there, which was pretty good at that. So I was like around 18 when I started doing that. And then after a little while, I moved down to DC, Baltimore area to continue doing the same thing, like a lot of full-time performing at a lot of Arabic nightclubs mostly, but also some restaurants. And DC is where I started teaching really regular classes. DC is an amazing area for belly dance because it has a ton of really great teachers, and it has two studios that focus specifically in belly dance. And I got to work at both of them, one and then switching to the other to teach pretty full-time intensive classes. So I'm trying to think of this in a way that's gonna not get super lost. Okay, so anyway, by this time I was in like my early 20s, and I was going back and forth between mostly teaching and mostly performing. This is when I started to have a lot of content be put out online. I made a conscious effort to put a lot of stuff up on YouTube and a lot of stuff up on Facebook. And this is around the time that I started getting more workshop jobs nationally, and then internationally. And it was all uphill from there. It was been a long journey so far, so it's hard to try and condense it. But as far as work-wise, that's kind of how it progressed. Like nightclub work, then trying to teach some classes and developing the teaching skills, then starting to really push on social media and things like this to get more of an international following, and then starting to slowly travel and teach. And that's where I'm at right now.
Cool. And how did you end up in Cairo?
So I had been traveling to Cairo starting from when I was about 17. The first time I came, well, let me take one little step back. There were two teachers that I was taking with in the U.S. I was taking with Norhan Sharif, and I was taking with Fatin Salama, and they had both hosted Raia Hassan like a bunch of times for workshops. So I had met her through that. I had gotten to take some private lessons with her, and she encouraged me, of course, to come to her festival in Cairo. So I went to one of the winter courses. She does the big festival in the summer, and then she does like a smaller, more intensive course in the winter. So I did that when I was about 17, and of course I had an amazing time and I loved it. So every couple of years I would be going back and just continuing to take classes. In 2011, January 2011, I actually took a trip there, and a couple people at that point had been starting to really encourage me to try to seek out work there. But literally, when I was there, the revolution started. And we had to pack up our stuff and like get out. I was there with my mom because we were doing some touristy stuff first, and then I was going to stay and take some classes and see about work stuff, but we had to get out. So to be honest, that was like a really discouraging point. But looking back on it, I wasn't ready at that point. Like it wouldn't have worked out very well. So anyway, I changed my focus at that point more into teaching when I got back home. So I took a step back from performing and really, really focused on building my teaching skills. I got my Pilates certification, which helped a lot with explaining movements and anatomy training and stuff like that, which ended up being really priceless to my teaching skills. And anyway, a couple years later, going to another Raia Hassan workshop in the States, and this time she brought one of my absolute favorite dancers from Egypt, who's this Brazilian woman named Soraya Zayed. And they were both really encouraging. They were like, oh, come visit, please. Everything's great now, and we'll have a fun time. And I was like, yeah, I want to go back. So I went back, and I spent a lot of time that trip with Raia. She let me and Norhan Sharif stay at her house, which was really amazing to get to talk to that lady a bunch. And I also spent a lot of time with Soraya. She took me around to a lot of her jobs and introduced me to a lot of people. So basically, she was being very encouraging of me coming. She said, oh, I think you'll have a nice time and you'll do well here, and your style is the right kind of style that I think would work well for the audiences here. And she introduced me to a manager in Cairo who had me do a few auditions and was basically just like, here's an open invitation whenever you want to come. Like, you can work, I'll hook you up. And I just decided to take the plunge because there wasn't really a reason not to. If things went well, it would be great. If I just ended up coming and learning a bunch, like, it would also be great. So I decided to get rid of my apartment in DC, sell a bunch of my stuff, leave my stuff in my parents' house, and travel out to Egypt to try out the expat life.
Cool. All right. So I'd like to jump into the interview proper. And, before I get into this, I want to give a little bit of background on why I asked you to talk about this. Not why I asked you, because obviously you're really qualified to talk about this, but why I have this on the brain. And that's that my mentors were mostly people who danced in the 70s. And for them, performing was a viable full-time occupation for the majority of dancers that were out there. One of my mentors as late as the 80s, was able to make a living just with restaurants and party gigs. And it seems like today that's a considerably less viable path for a lot of people. And so it seems like a lot of the money is more in teaching. And so more often, the people that we're selling to are other dancers or people who are interested in becoming dancers. So I'm very interested in who you're selling to and what your primary service is affects you as an artist, you as a business person, and the dance itself. So I'd like to ask you about some of the aspects of that. So
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting subject, and it's definitely something that I have been observing, like especially because I had the luck to actually get to do a bunch of performing first and then making my way into like the teaching realm. So it's a super interesting subject and I'm so happy you wanted to talk about it.
awesome. So I think I'd like to hit these kind of one facet at a time, but if we do, branch off into other things, please keep talking because that's usually when my guests get to the good stuff. So, what do you think some of the differences are in being a full-time pro versus somebody who operates professionally and gets paid, but has other sources of income as well?
I think when, not speaking from experience, but this is just the perspective I have. I think that when this is not your main source of income, you definitely have a lot more freedom to treat it more as a passion as opposed to just strictly, this is what I'm doing for money. You don't have to worry about maybe doing things you don't really want to do, being like more marketable to people because it's not your main source of income. I feel like when you're doing this more as just your hobby, you get to be a little selfish. And not in a bad way. When you're a hobbyist dancer and you're just doing this for fun, the whole focus is inward. You are doing things motivated from what you want and what you like and what makes you happy. And when you make that switch into being a full-time professional dancer, you have to consider more what your audience wants and what's going to make them happy, what's going to make you more attractive as far as being hired for different parties or different workshops. So the focus switches from inward to a more outward focus, if that makes sense. And I think that's the biggest difference.
And for the record, as somebody who is a part-time pro, I will tell you that all of the considerations that a full-time pro has to take into account definitely still affect your opportunity. So it's not that we, don't have to consider those things. It's that we have the luxury of not doing it if we're willing to give up opportunities for it.
Yes, no, completely. And I know a lot of dancers that aren't making their entire living from this, but I mean, still want to take it seriously and on a professional level. So you're completely right. But yes, like the point is you have the luxury of really choosing what you want to do and what you want to focus on, as opposed to being driven by like, I need to pay my rent. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And what are some of the things that you have to do that you wish you didn't, or that you might choose to do less of if you, let's say won the small time lottery? I don't know if I don't know if everybody knows these things, but in New York State, which is where my family lives, they have this scratch ticket where you get $1,000 a week for life, which is like not actually that much money. Like, but it's enough that you could just pay your bills and then like spend your time the way you wanted to. So like, imagine you won that. Right. And so you didn't have to worry about paying your rent. Are there any particular things that you would do less of or you would stop doing if you didn't have to make your living at it?
That's a really interesting question.
Or maybe another way of
I
phrasing that is if somebody was considering going full time, what would you want them to make sure that they're prepared to do?
I think you really need to love what you're doing. I don't think anybody who takes even part-time professional dancers. Like, I don't think that you would be putting in the time and the effort that it takes, even just on a part-time level, but especially on a full-time level, to do this if you didn't really, really love dancing. You know what I mean? But what can get a little hard sometimes, especially, I guess it's both dancing in a performance genre, but also in the teaching world. The main problem I have sometimes is getting really fatigued, not just physically, but like mentally. And that's really hard, I think, in an artistic job, because you always want to be giving your best on stage. You want to be giving your best to your students in class, but it's a very, very draining job. So I think the hardest part about doing it full time is those nights where you just want to curl up and rest, and you have to push yourself and like go out and do your job. I guess it's the same in a lot of jobs, but I think that's especially hard in an artistic job when you're really not feeling up to it physically and mentally, but you still have to push and get up on stage and smile and entertain people. So
Got it.
I never get sick of the actual dancing, of course, because I love dancing. But I think that is something that a lot of professional dancers experience at a certain point, is just like a lot of fatigue. But you can't really take a break, or if you do, it can't be for very long. You know what I mean?
hmm Besides just the money you're not making during your break, sometimes that makes it harder to get more if you're just not in the loop anymore.
Exactly, yeah.
Awesome. I actually did take a semi-break for about 5 months a couple of years ago, where I just cut off all my internet commitments, essentially. I still taught, but I gave myself a break from all of this like more public stuff, and it was very refreshing, but I could not have done that if I didn't have a part-time day job. And
Yeah,
so I definitely
yeah.
feel it. Awesome.
It's really nice to be able to do that artistically, because you can refresh your mind. You can put your focus, like I said, more inward. Sometimes I need that to find new inspiration. I need to kind of distance myself from thinking about it in a work perspective and just think about it in a more organic, what do I like to do? How do I want to move? You know what I mean? So sometimes taking a break is so nice artistically, but if it's your full-time job, it's very hard to find that time.
hmm And do you have any tips on how to get that refreshing back in when you can't take a substantial break?
I so often find myself being refreshed just by watching things, like going out to a show. I have the luxury, obviously, now of going out to see some amazing shows. And sometimes just seeing a dancer I love on stage is enough to like reignite my excitement and like get ideas flowing in my mind. But watching a lot of old video footage, because I am a huge fan of like old belly dancers. So sometimes just marathoning that stuff, listening to the music that I really, really adore, can get me back in the mood to create and everything.
Mhm. Cool.
I just have to see Dina, to be honest. That's the easiest thing for me to do. I go see one of her shows and it's done. I'm like so excited and so inspired again. So I think
Cool.
you just have to find something that really inspires you, to kind of reignite it. At least that's what works for me.
Nice. Now, if we start looking at another facet, how do you think that making your living primarily as a performer differs from when you have a more mixed income stream, like teaching locally or touring for workshops, etc.?
I think that your scope of work as a dancer really, well, I guess it works both ways. It will influence your style a lot, but jobs you get are also going to be dictated slightly by the style that you are best in. Because I think there are definitely dancers with a personal style that are more appealing to other dancers, and there are dancers whose style is more appealing to the general public. And both are valid and gorgeous, but for some reason, you just see certain styles fitting in with different groups and developing that way, which has been the most interesting thing for me, honestly, working in workshops and classes as well as performing, is seeing how different those things can be and the different things dancers really enjoy to see versus the general public.
Mhm. And what are some of those things? What are some of the differences that you notice?
Oh, so many differences. The first that would be pretty big is the aesthetic differences between working for the public versus working for other dancers. But that varies also so much depending on who you're performing for, if you're a performer, and where you're performing. I think there's a huge range in aesthetics in belly dance, across the teaching world and the performing world. I was talking to one of my friends today who's not involved in dance about costuming a little bit, and I was mentioning there are certain things that I would wear in one context, like say performing for an Arabic audience, that I wouldn't necessarily wear performing for dancers because I don't think they would like it as much. I think that, well, not think, because I've had actually this happened before. I've always liked really sexy costumes. I'm crazy about costumes in general, but I've never been very shy about showing a lot of cleavage or showing a lot of leg. And that's something that has never been a problem in Arabic nightclubs, but has been a problem at times working for other dancers, that some people really have a problem with it. So aesthetics is a big thing that changes when you work for other dancers versus the general public, especially working for an Arabic audience, because they really expect a certain look for the dancer, whereas when you're working for other dancers, obviously we're a lot more accepting of different looks, different ages, different body types. Whereas in certain places where you're working in the entertainment industry, they really want a really specific look for the dancer. And that changes a lot depending on what country you're in and what kind of venues you're working in. So, yeah.
Awesome. I would
that's one
love
main
to dig
difference.
into some of the specifics there. Would you be willing to tell us a little bit more about some of the differences
Yeah,
in like
sure.
very specific context?
Just don't be afraid to ask me really specific questions, because I have a tendency to go off on tangents.
Tangents are good. Let's do it.
When I am dancing mostly just for performance reasons, one of the first things I consider is my venue and the audiences that I'm going to be performing for there. And I'll just talk towards a costuming theme for now, and style next, because the style is also important and complicated. Mm-hmm. But anyway, even just in the States, from venue to venue, I would completely change the nature of my costuming. I worked for and still work for a really wide range of clientele. And just depending on where they're from, I would change a lot about my costuming. For Americans, I would actually cover up a little more because I found that American audiences got a little bit uncomfortable with more sexy costuming. And I think that it was easier for American audiences to identify belly dancer with like the really classic fluffy skirt, bra and belt, lots of fringe, lots of beads. Whereas if I switched into a nightclub with mostly Egyptian clientele, I feel like I could wear a more modern Egyptian costume. So like sleeker fit, maybe the belt and the skirt were one piece, maybe there was a higher split, maybe it was a lower cut bra, because they're used to seeing dancers that way in like the music videos and everything. But moving into other other clientele from other parts of the world, this was interesting. Especially in DC, I would work for a lot of Indian clientele and Pakistani, and they wanted a belly dancer, but they wanted the belly dancer to be really much more covered up than I was used to working. So almost like no bra, like a choli or a shirt that really covered a lot of the chest. Sometimes they didn't want the belly showing, no legs showing. So it was just really interesting to see how different the tastes were, depending on the clientele. And that's something I still try to be really sensitive to. And of course, it's not just country to country. Like, you might have different experiences with the same group of people. Like, some Americans might be cool with this or cool with this, depending on what area you're in or even what restaurant you're in. You never know. But this has just been personally what I've experienced.
All right, so we've talked about some of the costume stuff. What about some of the different ways that you would dance or present yourself?
The biggest thing I would say that affects my style of dance is the actual dance venue itself. And this is where I see the biggest difference in style coming from. Now it's really common to see, especially if you travel around and do a lot of workshops and stuff. Now it's really common to see dancers who have only ever danced for other dancers in like a gala show or a Hafla setting. So usually like 6 minutes or less. If you're at some of these big workshops, usually you're up on a stage and you have a lot of room. You're separated from the audience. You only have a short amount of time. So this dictates a lot of what you do in your performance, especially at the international gala shows. I think the girls, they want to show off in that short amount of time. You want to pack as much, almost like a competition setting. They pack as much kind of excitement and all of their best moves and everything they can into this short little snippet of time, because that's all you have to showcase yourself on stage. And the use of the stage completely changes also when you're up on a raised platform. You actually have a lot of space and you're separated from the audience. It's not as easy or as important to get the same kind of rapport with your audience in a really short time up on a big stage, as opposed to in a nightclub set when you're right up next to people for a long amount of time. So I think the focus changes a lot, what you're basing your moves on and why you're doing the moves you're doing. how you're pacing yourself. It changes a lot due to this context. Whereas if you're a nightclub performer, you usually have at least 20 minutes. In a lot of Arabic clubs, and especially overseas, you're used to doing 30 minutes to an hour on stage. So if you came out guns blazing, did all your awesome moves, threw yourself on the ground, like did all this crazy stuff, all these crazy shimmies in the first 5 minutes, and you continued in that style of dancing, you would die. We have time to pace ourselves. When we're doing a nightclub show, you can focus a lot more on the different people in your audience and connecting with people and going through different musical and dance styles because you have the time. So you can really focus on, okay, I'm doing a really slow, juicy taksim, and I can just do like 2 moves because I have all this time. And now I'm going to do shabi and play with the people in my audience. And now I'm going to do drum solo or whatever. So that, I think, is the biggest thing that changes the style of dance between the workshop and hafla and class world and the nightclub dancing world. Proximity to audience, the size of your stage, and also the amount of time that you're going to be dancing.
And what about who's in the audience? Have you seen, let's say we're in a nightclub setting, but it's mostly general public versus mostly Middle Eastern folks. Do you notice any different behavior? That's not the right way to put it. Do you feel like there are different demands on you in a situation like that?
Oh, yes, completely. And I think that you can really sell yourself to different audiences if you're very aware of what they're going to respond well to. After the costuming thing, the next biggest thing that I tweak a lot for different audiences is obviously the music choices. When I did a lot of shows for mostly American audiences, I would go for a style, not just of music, but also of dance that was more gimmicky. I don't know. More flashy and fun and like more showing off and big exaggerated movements with really upbeat music, mostly without lyrics, because obviously if you come out to an American audience and you want to do like some slow emotional song with Arabic lyrics, they probably will be a little confused. Maybe they'll think it's nice, but I don't think that that's the right kind of choice for that setting. When you start performing for North African and Arab and Levantine customers, it's really beneficial to know a little bit of background about the different areas and the different styles of music, and a little bit, if you can, about the social dance that goes on in those different regions. So for example, if I'm working for a Lebanese crowd, I would throw more Lebanese pop songs in, more Nancy Ajram and stuff like that, and always make sure I had like a really poppy Debka song, because that's the music that they like really respond to well. For Egyptians, of course, for me it's the most fun because they really like the range of music. They love seeing shabi, but they also love seeing classic stuff. Like they never get sick of the classics like Abdel Halim and Kulthum songs. So I think you have more freedom depending on the venue also, but you have more freedom with them to choose like more of a variety of different kinds of music. So I really base the structure of my show a lot on who is going to be in the audience.
Mhm. All right, and then one more, audience that we haven't really touched on yet is when you have a whole lot of dancers in the house. And that's obviously the norm in the galas and haflas that you mentioned, but certainly in my area, we're seeing that even in a lot of the very long-standing venues, like the Greek restaurant that's been around since the 70s with live music every night, we're getting a higher and higher proportion of dancers in the audience. So we're dancing with the same bands in the same spaces, but who's making up that audience is changing. Do you have any observations about what dancers respond to versus the general public or a Middle Eastern audience?
The most the most interesting thing working a lot for other dancers, and especially in the past few years, is learning what they want in different places. The dance communities in different countries, I have found, are very different. Like they have trained in different styles. They're really influenced by the exposure to which teachers, whether they've been like more American teachers or tribal teachers or Egyptian teachers. What they expect has a lot to do with where their kind of belly dance culture has come from, like in their country, if that makes sense. So I actually feel pressure to dance different ways in different places, and I try not to let it affect my style too much, but I'll also usually use that as a basis for like choosing what kind of songs I'm going to do, because some countries, they respond really well to one kind of music and not another. But let's say in America, I actually feel very free because I think there's a lot of different interests in the States as far as dance goes right now, and it's really cool. So I feel like I can come out and have a fair amount of freedom in what I do and know that the dancers are going to be like really cool and appreciative. Whereas in some countries, they respond more to like really theatrical stuff in one place versus like really emotional stuff in one place versus they just want tabla solo in one place. So going around and seeing the really specific and big range of interests in different places has been interesting.
Right. And are there any other big changes in the dance that you'd like to talk about as you face different audiences, or any other aspects of how you would operate or the choices that you would make?
In a lot of ways, I still feel like a baby in this industry. And the more I travel and see, the more I feel like I have to learn. And especially having spent so many years going in between different belly dance communities, I feel it hard for me personally to distinguish, let's say, like the changes that have been slowly happening in one place. I think I'm probably a little less sensitive to that because I'm going so much in between different dance communities, so it all gets mixed up in my brain. But there are a lot of trends that I do see coming out style-wise, and this is mostly on the international circuit. There are certain dancers that seem to really shape the style that a lot of people are taking. You'll get one dancer, let's say, this is a big example, okay? Let's say Ronda Hamill, Egyptian dancer, very, very modern, stylized style, Egyptian style. Very mixed with modern dance, very mixed with folklore dance. Not exactly viable in Egypt, this style, but on the workshop circuit to foreign dancers, people absolutely love it. And you can see a huge effect that just this one dancer has had. At some festivals, you can see her style and her movements in like an entire room of students sometimes. There are certain teachers that have that effect now, and especially if they travel around a lot and dancers are primarily taking their style, they kind of take on secondhand that style, and then it gets passed on to all their students. That's a really interesting thing to see. Like one teacher can completely dictate the style of like a generation of dancers in a certain place. And I guess you see that a little bit in the States too, with dancers who have really, really developed training regimens that they'll certify people in those styles. You start to see more similar technique between large groups of dancers and similar musicality because they're basing it on like this one person they've learned from. I see that a lot. You can show up and be like, this is where this lady studied from because all of her students use this movement and this way of interpreting the music. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think that's interesting because, one of the things that I remember my ears perking up when you mentioned it in the workshop that I met you in was that in the, kind of full-time performer context that you were in, distinguishing yourself from other dancers is a big part of what makes you successful rather than absorbing that style wholesale.
Yes, completely. And that's a huge difference that I see between the dance community and the like professional dancers. Of course, I shouldn't categorize it like that because the teachers are professional also, of course. But between like the teaching market and the performing market, let's say, of course you'll have performers that might try and copy each other a little bit if they see something that's working for another dancer, maybe they'll copy it. Of course, this exists. But I think in general, it really is so important to your success to set yourself apart from others because they don't want carbon copies. And in the workshop and teaching world too, if you want to be like a standout, new, eye-catching person, it's a much better route to take to try and be very, very original than to copy another dancer. But I think it's very common, especially when you're taking classes, if you really focus a lot in classes with one person, of course you're going to take on their technique and their way they work with the music and the way they work with their face. But I think it's so important for that reason, if you really want to set yourself apart, to get around and train with as many people as possible, and also make sure you still have your own unique voice. I think as a professional, this is a really important thing.
And are there other trends in the community or changes that you've seen happening over the course of your career, whether that's in the market or the dance community itself?
Yes. It's been interesting to come to Cairo in particular and see the changes that are happening here, but it's also hard to recognize if there are a lot of changes or if it's the change in perspective that I have, having been looking from the outside and then changing and being able to see things from the inside. I think that switch of perspective is a huge one, going from the outside to the inside. In any facet of the business here, I think it really changes your opinion a lot on a lot of things. But it does seem in Egypt that there's a lot of change in the venues and what people are looking for in dancers. Right now, it seems like there's a big influx of foreign dancers who aren't really trying to dance in an Egyptian way, that are either mixing their style with Egyptian style or just doing their own thing. But they're being accepted and like finding success. And the venues are also changing a lot. And this seems to be the same in the States. Like it seems like a lot of live music venues are drying up, because definitely when I started, and that wasn't even that long ago, like I was working almost every show with a live band. And just over the course of like 5 years or 6 years, that really changed a lot where I was in the States. And I've heard that from a few other dancers too. And in Egypt, it seems the same. It's like, of course, there are still so many live music opportunities, but it's shifting a little bit, and there's a lot more opportunity for things like dancing to a CD on a bar and stuff like that, because now there's like a big influx of Western style nightclub trends, but they still keep like a little Egyptian flavor. Like they'll have an electronic violin playing Arabic stuff on top of house music, and they'll have a belly dancer on the bar. So this seems to be a new kind of venue for dance that wasn't there before, but it also changes the style of the dance. Like you're not dancing to traditional music anymore. You're dancing on a tiny little place to techno music. It's very strange. But I think, like I said, I've heard the same from other dancers in the States about the live music. I don't know, what would you say?
That's certainly something we're seeing in my area. Yeah, we've still got a lot, but not as much as we just had a venue close last month. It's been open since the 70s, and it's gone. And I've also seen a lot more shift from kind of those like family/supper club restaurants where everybody comes and spends the whole night there, versus you're getting a lot more like hookah bars that have that kind of casual recorded music kind of situation.
Yeah. I saw the same thing in the areas that I had been working. The same. So yeah, I think those are the biggest shifts I've seen performance-wise. It's like a lot of shift in the venues and like the kind of shows that they want from the belly dancers.
Now, I can't speak to where you are, but one of the things that we're seeing in my area is some demographic shifts in the audiences. When I was just starting to perform, there were still a lot of like older folks from, I hate to use the word ethnic, refer to people because everybody's got an ethnicity, but like from the local ethnic communities. So you'd have like, when I first started at the student night at my favorite place, like every single Thursday, the same group of like Armenians, they were like 65, 70, they sat at the same table every time, talked to me every time. And it seems like that generation was a lot of the support for the dance because they knew what it was. They were used to seeing it. They identified it as theirs. And it seems like we're getting less and less of that in our audiences. Are you seeing any demographic shifts in the audiences that you're encountering in Egypt, or when you're back in the States, or as you travel?
Nice thing about Egypt is I think there's always going to be the old timers that love the old music and everything. But there is this like new young demographic, the Shabi and Maharganat demographic of like young people that want to get out and party. So that affects the way that you would be marketing yourself as a dancer and in shows. A lot of people are making a really good performance living right now, like kind of focusing in that area. A lot of foreign girls are coming in and having a lot of success doing like shabby music videos that are like silly and sexy and fun, and then going and dancing at the Western style nightclub, getting up on like a bar or like a little stage, and it's like house music and then some shabby and then so I think the demographic of people that this is reaching, or like the demand is from them, that's had that effect on the dance. Like that has been the reason that these new venues have come into existence and changed a lot. And I'm sure that's had an effect in the States too. Like all these younger people like super into the hookah thing. They want to go out and they think it's really cool, but you wouldn't present dance in that kind of a venue in the same way that you would in, like you said, the old style like supper club. You go and you do like a real show with like, I don't know, your full set, your entrance piece and your slow set and your Saidi stuff. And I'm sure that's where a lot of the shift is coming from.
All right. And then, over the course of your career, what kinds of changes have you seen in the belly dance community or communities?
To be honest, I have a hard time wrapping my brain around this one, just because I see something new and completely different like every time I travel. So, like I said before, it's a little hard for me to see if it's something like developing versus something I just haven't seen before. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I'd be interested in hearing any of those observations, and then everybody can take those as they want.
Mm-hmm. I think, like you said before, how most of your teachers were like full-time performers in the 70s, in that era. I think probably the biggest shift in the quote unquote like new generation of teachers that are getting out there. I see a lot of teachers on the scene who've never worked as a professional like performer. I see a lot of teachers who have only ever worked for other dancers. Not that it's a bad thing, but it's a really interesting thing. One, because it's amazing that like you can do that there's that demand and that the community is like so strong and supportive like that. But it's really changing the style of the dance within the dance community. Not having that context of having dance professionally, like in nightclubs or whatever, totally changes the style of dance and has a huge effect on what they teach to people. So you have whole groups of students now, especially in some countries where belly dance is a little bit newer. Places like China, they haven't had belly dance for that long. And you can really see when you go teach where the influence for like their style is coming from. What's really interesting to see there is that most of the teachers they bring in now are from Russia, and most of the teachers in Russia have never worked professionally in a public performance setting. Like their whole careers have been spent inside the belly dance community. Not all, of course, but most. So that has been really interesting to see because it totally changes the style of dance, and then it has a broad effect because you have so many people like training in this specific style. And I think that it's good and bad. It brings new inspiration and new ideas into the dance that sometimes are like really interesting and cool. But on the other hand, I think it can distance the dance more and more from its roots. If you haven't had that firsthand performance experience or haven't studied deeply in folklore, you've only studied from a dancer who her whole career has just been doing Oriental for 3 minutes, like on a big theater stage, it can really change the look and the feel of the dance and sometimes really remove it from its its roots.
Mhm. I feel like one thing that I've had on the brain for a long time, and one of the reasons why I was so interested in talking to you about this, is that I feel like the development of the dance is not just controlled by who's doing it and who's playing the music, but specifically on who's vetting it, right? Who is saying, do it this way, don't do it this way, we like this, we don't like this looks right to us, this looks wrong to us. And again, getting back to my teacher's generation, they were mostly dancing for Middle Easterners, or at least very mixed audiences. And so the folks who are telling them, do this, don't do this, hire her again, don't hire her again, it had this kind of correcting force. So even though everybody was trying to be an individual and make their mark and develop their own style, they had these pressures kind of keeping everybody along a path that was going in one direction, even if they were individuals acting on that. And I feel like a lot of that vetting is shifting to the dance community itself, and that's very, very different. We still have you, Shahrzad? Okay, I think we might have lost her. Right, we're going to give Shahrzad another minute to get connected again. In the meantime, while we're waiting for her to reconnect, if anybody has any questions for her, if you're listening on the webcast in particular and don't have audio, you can type in your questions in the text box at the right, and we'll come back to those at the end of the call. Or if you want to just start taking this time to thinking about what questions you'd like to ask, this will be a good opportunity. Oh, it looks like we've got her back. Let me unmute her. Hey, Shahrzad, can you hear me?
Hello.
All right.
Yeah, sorry about that. My call got dropped.
No problem. We'll edit that part out. All right. So what was the last thing you remember hearing?
You were starting to talk about who's vetting the dance having a big effect on how the style has been developing.
Yeah. So, just to kind of get back to that point was that, in my teacher's day, they were mostly performing either for Middle Easterners or for very mixed audiences. And so while everybody was trying to be an individual and find their own voice and their own style, you still had this kind of like correcting pressure. Maybe correcting is not the right word, but you had the pressure of the audience kind of keeping everybody moving in a similar direction, even though the dance itself was growing and evolving. And I feel like the dance community is taking on that role these days, and that creates very different market pressures and very different stylistic pressures. Has that been your experience?
Yes, that has been my experience. And oh, sorry, were you going to say something?
No, I was definitely waiting to hear from you.
One thing that I dislike is when teachers in the belly dance community, I've seen both. I've seen teachers like very encouraging of different styles and stuff, but I've also seen some teachers take a very strict approach as far as technique goes. Like, you have to do it this way. You have to do this technique. You have to interpret the music this way. You have to do it like this. I'm really not a fan of that kind of mentality, because when you do travel around, not just in the dance community, but obviously when you go to countries of origin and you go and you watch dancers, you see how much creativity and how much variation there is from dancer to dancer. There are common themes that you see, but it's usually not what belly dancers are looking for. And I think that is what you were getting at from like Middle Eastern people and North African people being the ones who are vetting the dance. They're going to be looking for something so different than what dancers would be watching for. You know what I mean? They're going to be looking for things like how you express the music, your stage presence, and how you interact with the audience. They care about dance movements, but not in a sense of like, oh, she's doing the shimmy from her hips and not her knees. It's not right. You know what I mean? It's more like, oh, she didn't hear this subtle change in the rhythm and she didn't react, so I didn't feel it as much. They react on a more emotional level, or I should say a more almost subconscious level, because this is a dance that they've grown up with from when they're little, and they're used to it evoking certain feelings. They're used to just subtle changes in the music and the style, changing the way that the dancer's body reacts. It's just a totally different perspective that they have on the dance, because it's part of their culture and their heritage. We have such a different perspective on the dance. So it's hard from an outsider perspective to come in and say, no, it has to be this way, and no, you have to do this technique this way. When you start traveling around, you realize how much room there really is for creativity, but you have to still be sensitive to where this is coming from. And I think that can get lost really easily, that sensitivity for the culture and the music.
Mhm. And are there specific things that you see that the dance community tends to value that either gets in the way of that or distracts us from that, or, is valid in itself but doesn't necessarily help us do that?
Oh yeah. I think just relating to what I said before, like too much of a technique focus at times, too much of a technical approach while leaving out the other parts of the dance that are so important, which are like context, where is the music coming from, like what are the traditional movements you see to this. I think the more that you disconnect and just focus on technique and like, oh, she didn't do her arabesque very good, the farther you kind of remove yourself from the more, let's say, like quote unquote original context of the dance. It's spawning really new and beautiful stuff, but it's the more you focus on Western technique, Western props, Western music, like the farther you're drifting slowly away from the original like purpose and meaning of this dance for the people who it comes from.
Mhm. And are there any other like pros or cons of the dance community doing more and more of that vetting that you'd like people to think about?
Yeah. I, as a person who got really, really into folklore and stuff, pretty much immediately when I was taking dance classes. I think, especially right now with how divided a lot of people in the world are, art is one way that without language or without anything, we can connect on such an amazing level. And I think coming in and learning a lot about the actual roots of this dance and the actual culture and the people and why they do what they do, why this music has this meaning. It gives you a deeper understanding of someone else's culture, really like intricate, beautiful cultures. And I just, being such a geek for the background of this dance, it doesn't matter if you're going to perform exactly like they do in Egypt or exactly like they do in Lebanon, but it just seems really tragic to me to not get a little glimpse of like these awesome cultures and like gorgeous music and really cool folklore. I think that's the biggest thing you kind of miss out on.
All right. And what steps do you think that the dance community as a whole can take to, be a force for good in that respect?
Just education and sharing, and especially being open. One unfortunate thing that I've seen a few times recently has been online, somebody seeing a video and not really understanding the context or understanding what the dancer is doing and immediately jumping to a point of like judgment about it, as opposed to being like, I haven't seen this before. I wonder why she's doing this. I wonder why she's dressed like this. I wonder what's like really going on. I've seen that happen a couple times recently, and I think the best thing we can do is be open to learning new things about the dance, and also just be open to other perspectives you might not have considered before, because this dance is not black and white. Like, it's very complicated, and there's so much variation depending on where you are and what you're doing and who you learn from. And so, I don't know, that's the thing I would like to see, to be honest, is just people having a more open mind, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And then, thinking about the folklore piece, and again, this is like stuff I've got on the brain because people keep saying this in very quiet ways. This just keeps coming up and up on my radar. And one of the things that I found kind of tricky about this is, finding sources of information. Because often if you say to a belly dancer, do you know any folklore? They'll say, yes, I know Saidi, and do like a cabaret cane piece, which is often perfectly good, awesome cabaret cane piece, but often we don't get deeper into the folklore because we don't know where to get it. Do you have any suggestions on finding that kind of information?
Just a sec. Okay. This is a really good question. Because folklore is a really, I don't know, it's a hard subject to approach even within Egypt. And my favorite person to explain this is Shahrzad. I love how she breaks down the context of dance in which you see it, especially regarding folklore. Because you're right, like in so many cases, the quote unquote folklore we're seeing is rated troupe converted into Oriental and then being done by belly dancers. So it's not invalid, but it's also not like the actual folklore that it's coming from. It's not like the pure, unadulterated
It's not the
dancers.
information we need.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need to be doing grapevines to know where Saidi comes from. It's kind of a hard subject because, to be honest, most of the folklore teachers we have now are Reda troupe or Kalmea troupe inspired. So like there's always some mix. I think the best way to get information on the real down home like village folklore is to talk to people who have really made an effort to go out and actually find those things. My teacher Habiba had done that with the Banat Mazin dancers for her Gawazi pieces. Like she had gone out and studied with them a bunch of times in I think the late 80s or early 90s or something like that. And obviously like Sahara is a great resource for things like that. I know Aisha Ali took a lot of really good video footage and musical recordings. There's a bunch of American dancers who have made an effort to go and do that, but I do think finding examples of quote unquote like real folklore, it's definitely difficult. Like you definitely have to go seek it out. And to be honest, that's one big interest I've had being in Egypt is going and documenting some stuff like that because it's not easy to find. Like you have to go out and find it for yourself and take videos. So that's a project I'm working on right now. I'm trying to seek out a lot of folklore and try and get pictures and videos and talk to the people a little bit about the dance in the background.
Cool. Well, we're going to have to move on to our question and answer pretty soon, but is there anything that you wanted to talk about or bring up that I didn't ask you about?
I'm good.
All right. Well, my
whatever
favorite
you
question.
guys want to do.
Yeah. All right. Well, one question I like to ask everybody is, we just had this great conversation, but if people walk away with just one thing, if they remember one thing and take it to heart, what would you want that to be?
Pretty much what I said before about just having an open mind and trying to see things from different perspectives. When you watch a dancer for the first time, to do it from a place of interest and support as opposed to jumping to maybe a preconceived idea you had about like what things should be. Because to be honest, the more I travel and the more I learn, the less judgmental I become and the more open my mind becomes, because you start to see things from so many different angles and you learn things that you really had no idea about before. And it's amazing. Like it's so fun to learn all of these new things about this dance all the time. Every day I'm learning something I didn't know before, and I think that you can miss out on a lot of that if you have a mentality of like, that's not how that should be. I know what this is. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So an open mind and listen and try and see different perspectives, because this dance is very complicated. There's a lot of variation. It's all awesome. It's all really fascinating. And the more open you are, the more you're going to learn. And I think you're going to enjoy this dance more if you have this kind of mindset.
Awesome. And if people want to learn more from you, how can they do that?
I try to keep a pretty good schedule up on my website of where I'm going to be teaching workshops. I'm traveling a bunch right now. I will be doing a fair amount of trips to like Canada and the States coming up soon. And I also do online classes. I'm looking for some time in my schedule to film a bunch more classes right now and pop those up, but I still have some, and you can always message me on Facebook or email me through my website. I'm very friendly. I like talking to people and nerding out about dance stuff. So feel free, please,
Nice.
please to reach out.
And you've also got some really great instructional DVDs. I want to put in a plug for those.
Yes, I'm bad at promoting myself. I have a bunch of DVDs, and one just came out where I kind of talk about the base folklore steps of a few different styles and how those have shaped a lot of modern belly dance technique. That was kind of a nerdy project that was really fun to do for me.
So I have not watched the DVD yet. I bought it, but it just arrived. But I did take a workshop with you where we touched on some of that stuff, and it was really, really helpful. So I'd like to especially plug that one. It seems to me like that might be a really good place for people to start dipping their toes into folklore and kind of get a sense of, which, of the many root dances might I want to explore first.
Yes.
Awesome. All right.
That would be
Well,
great.
we are going to go ahead and open this up for questions and answers. So if anybody has a question that they'd like to ask, if you're on the webcast and you don't have a mic and speakers, you can type that in the question box on the right. If you're on the phone or on Skype, you can press star to unmute yourself. And we would love to hear from you. So if you've got a question or if you want to share your favorite takeaway from this, we would love to hear it.
I will try to answer in a concise way. It is now 3:30 in the morning.
Yeah, we are super grateful that you're calling in this late.
No. It's okay. The funny thing is, I'm usually up this late for work, but yesterday and today I took off to go to this oasis for a day or two. So I'm chilling out here with some palm trees around. We got up early to go drive around in the desert, so I'm a little sleepy today.
Nice. It looks like we've got a caller who's showing up as coming from Portland. Hi there.
Yeah. Hi, it's Shining.
Hi, Shining.
Hey.
Oh. I have a couple questions and an observation that are kind of compound, so I'll try and be as concise as possible.
Go for it.
The first question I have is regarding, I'd say, like, your thoughts and experience on not necessarily your own, but determining our own legitimacy in approaching teaching on the national or international market. So I guess part of that would be, I'm curious how you started teaching nationally. Like, did someone ask you, or did you start to like contact different festivals or things like that in order to like cross that bridge and get started teaching outside of your own city? And if other people are interested in that, how do you know that, like, if you feel like you know enough, but you're not really, like, nobody knows who I am, like, like nobody's going to hire me, like, I don't know what would you suggest crossing that bridge?
I think a lot of when I started doing workshops, it was mostly local stuff. And a lot of that was through word of mouth, and also me attending a lot of local performances and doing shows. At a certain point, I really did make a conscious effort to get myself out there a little more. I decided to go do like some showcases in some bigger events that more people came to from around, like from farther out around the country would come to. And I made a big effort putting a lot of content online, lots of videos. I've been very lucky, though, because people have, I haven't reached out much on my own. I've had a lot of people come to me for my opportunities, but I have, like I said, made that big effort to really put myself out there at different festivals and different places, as well as put a lot of content online just to get your face and your name around, and just being very friendly and networking with people at events and online. I think both of those things are really important. So I didn't make a big effort to reach out. I mostly got people coming to me, but I did put my effort in like putting myself out there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I hope that was that was a helpful answer.
Yeah, and like regarding, your like determining if, I guess, I don't know if the essential question is if you're ready to be teaching on the national or international market, or like, getting, say, like, so name recognition's a big thing, but it's not always a positive thing, right? Like, how do you instill positive name recognition so that people want to hire you, like when you're starting off and not being known about, I guess. Maybe that you already answered that, I'm not sure.
Let me think. I still don't feel ready for a lot of jobs, to be honest with you. I think it's something that you're never going to truly feel ready for, especially if you really care about what you do. I think it's good not to have some self-doubt, but just to have that voice inside that's like, you can do better, you should learn more, you shouldn't stop learning. Like, I think it's a healthy thing to have inside of you. So I wouldn't wait for that point to be like, okay, now I'm ready, or wait for somebody to tell you. Just get out and do it. And if it works out, great. And if it doesn't, continue to dance and continue to have fun. I think being successful in this business, it does take talent and charisma, but a lot of it is also luck. It's not an easy answer to say who's gonna make it and who isn't gonna make it. But yeah, go into events in a professional manner, interact with people, be very friendly, be very open, be very respectful. I've found that just my attitude that I have with people will definitely give them a good impression and encourage them to want to work with you. Besides the dancing and teaching skills, I really believe that can give you a really good reputation on its own. Just showing people that you're coming from like a professional, respectful place as a dancer. Like I said, I hope this is helpful. Oh.
Yeah, thank you. So the other question I have first is an observation about linguistics that might be helpful in some of the things that you and Nadira were talking about. I think essentially the point you're trying to make is something I've been thinking about a lot recently, that the core value system of, say, what was the core value system in the 70s in American Oriental is no longer the core value system that the current international dance community has, and it also doesn't match the core value system that Middle Eastern audiences have for the dance. So my question about that is really, you were saying something, in terms of education, and making it more holistic. It is part of our duties or our search should be to find this core value system. But when the Arab and Middle Eastern audiences' expectations are changing so rapidly, like you were saying with the techno shabby and these new venues coming up, where they don't necessarily want to see artistic classical interpretations of rock sharky, but they're more interested in just poppy entertainment streams that have really been influenced by this sort of global culture. Where does that leave us in this search for that core value system that's kind of rooted in dance as it was in the 60s and 70s and 80s? I hope that makes sense.
No, it totally does make sense. And I think it's a really important point to make because it's completely true. I think a lot of people have the habit of kind of getting stuck, not just style-wise, but like in a certain era. And it's totally cool to have your preferences as far as style goes, but it's also important to recognize that like art is living and breathing and evolving, and not just what we do in the belly dance community, but it's the same where it comes from. The traditional dances will always be the same with little variation. But on the commercial market, that's where you see rapid change in many different ways, like different trends in costuming and different movements. But to be honest, like I find that the core values are really rooted in like the social dance and the folk dance, which you don't see as much evolution in as you would in like the commercial entertainment like realm of the dance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and what I'm curious about is regarding like the social dances. I'm wondering if you've observed this, because in my own experience the last few years dancing at some of the folk festivals and also in like places like hookah lounges where they're owned by Persian or Arab owners, when you bring up those traditional social dances, they're kind of like, oh, they like the recognition of, oh, you know our dance, but it's also viewed as very old-fashioned. Like some of these things, it's like their great-grandparents did or their grandparents, and aren't really relevant to people in their like 20s and 30s anymore. So I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, where is this solid balance between us needing to know that information, to have that sort of cultural understanding, and also, I guess, being interesting to our audience, or like not being viewed as old-fashioned. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I don't think that what you have to do is perform the traditional dances in a traditional way to kind of like appeal to those audiences. Even the younger generations, and this is probably completely different also depending on if you're in America or not, because you might be getting second and third generation people who like are from this culture, like their heritage is from this culture, but their whole life has been spent in the States. You know what I mean? That can completely change what we're talking about, because they might not have even grown up with this music. But definitely in the countries of origin, people do, even if it's a younger person and they're not like exactly inclined to older music or traditional stuff, they still grow up hearing it and being exposed to it and dancing with it and seeing people dance with it. So even if they don't even if that's not what they would go do at a nightclub, they still recognize it. It's still inside of them. Especially here, you put an old song on, even if it's not what they're into, like they automatically know it. They automatically know how to move to the rhythm. It's just like embedded in them because they grow up this way. So it's not so much having to know the exact dances. It's more of these subconscious connections between movements and musical stylings. And a lot of that, oh man, I could go on a really long tangent. I have about the connection between like certain folk movements being connected to certain rhythms. So it's not always like a specific song. Even the modern songs, they're using the rhythms that they've been using forever. You know what I mean? Even the shabi and mahargan, it's still a maksum underneath. So there's still some old basis in these folk and social dances, even if the younger generation might not be able to recognize that and say it to you. It's still in the modern stylings in some capacity. Does that make sense? I hope so.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's the end of my question stream for the moment.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks, Shining. All right. Looks like we've got another caller. You're showing up as coming from Bakersfield, California, but if you're on Skype, that might not be true. Hey, can you hear us? Okay, so we've got a caller from California. Looks like you unmuted yourself. If you're still there, say hello. All right, in the meantime, we've got a typed in question from Candace. She says, how do you manage your energy on the road when teaching internationally at festivals? I've been lucky to be invited as a keynote at a few festivals, and I find I crash at the end. Do you just get used to it, or do you have any secrets to share?
I also crash at the end. No. I am starting to try and develop some like good habits on the road. Getting a lot of sleep before I leave for a job if I have time. I try to get booked on overnight flights, especially on my way to somewhere, so that I can sleep on the plane, get there, not let myself sleep until nighttime wherever I am, and sleep a lot. Like I try to immediately get on the schedule of that country. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. I try to immediately get on the schedule, and I really make sure with my sponsors that they know I need a lot of time to rest. Because sometimes in the excitement of bringing a teacher, you're like, oh my God, we're going to hang out and oh, we're going to do all these classes and it's going to be so great. And you do workshops all day, but then they want to take you to dinner and they want to do all these things, which is awesome. And it's so much fun. But at the end of the day, you're still human and you get really tired. So one thing that I've found helps me a lot is set really clear, not boundaries, but just saying in advance, like, hey, I get really, really worn out from my workshops. So it would be really great if I'm getting up at this time in the morning that you make sure that I'm like back to the hotel at this time at night so I can get this much sleep. Me and a couple other dancers I know we have that like in our contract actually. Like you have to let me sleep this much per night. Because yeah, in the excitement of planning an event, sometimes that kind of slips away from you. And not just on the sponsor side, sometimes you just get so excited and really wear yourself out. But if you're doing it on a regular basis, you have to be sensitive to yourself and your body's needs, because it is a very exhausting thing being on the road. So yeah, I sleep as much as possible, and I make sure that I have like a set amount of time every night to either just chill out by myself in the hotel and get some quiet time, or like really hard sleeping time.
All right. Candace said, thank you. That's great. I know I get so excited to hang out too, so make poor choices about sleep.
Yes, we all do.
All right. Thanks, Candace. That was a good question. All right. We've got somebody in San Luis Obispo, California, presumably. Hi there.
Hi, this is Majida. Hi,
Hey.
Shahrzad. Hi,
Hi, how are
Nadir.
you?
You can mute me because I have little disturbances around me, but I'll quickly go into my question. We've been talking about audiences a lot, and so I was born and raised in the Middle East, but I didn't dance over there, but I dance over here in the West. I have noticed some videos where the dancer is dancing, but the audience is predominantly male. So my question might be a little bit feministic. Hopefully it's not too challenging. So my question is it mostly the nightclub scene? Like I have seen teachers who are taking groups of girls to, say, Dubai, which is where I was born and raised, or other Middle Eastern destinations, and it's just, you see a beautiful girl, but there is like, wealthy men, enjoying. It's probably a hotel. I'm not sure. So what's it like really? And does that bother you? So is my question clear?
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Yes,
so
and it's a good question.
All right. So please mute me because I have kids around.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do that.
It's a very good question, and it's something that you have to tackle when you enter the world of professional, like commercial, quote unquote commercial performance. Especially, I'm just going to talk about Egypt, but every country, it has its own rules and its own variations, even in the States. Like certain venues are going to have a certain kind of clientele and a certain way they want you to dance based on that clientele. In Egypt, this is especially true, and you see so much variation here. There are most of the stuff that we're used to seeing. Let's start with this. Most of the stuff we're used to seeing video-wise of belly dancers in Egypt, we're usually seeing the nicer boats or hotel venues, which have like a big stage and the band, and you get to do a more artistic show. The audience is a lot more mixed. There might be families, women and men together. But there are also a lot of venues here that are a lot more focused on late night, nightlife, partying, drinking, like throwing money, all of this stuff. And this is where you see a lot more focus on like the sexy aspect of the dancing. Yes, the audience is going to be more predominantly male. And the dancers are going to be dancing in a way more provocative way and more provocative costuming. So you see a huge range here as far as that goes, and it has a huge effect on how the dancer styles herself and how she works, for sure. So it's definitely not just a mixed family thing here. Depending on the venue, it can be like a very, very sexy thing. And you have to be honest about how you're going to see a dancer in this culture. Most people aren't used to seeing women in revealing stuff, so I think it's like a no-brainer to say that of course the guys are going to be looking at the dancer in kind of a sexual way just based on the fact that she's a beautiful woman dancing up on stage in a revealing costume. Like even in the more artistic venues, it's kind of hard to deny that that is on people's minds to a certain extent. Not that it's going to be everybody, but I mean, it's an undeniable aspect of the dance here at least.
All right, I'm going to unmute you for a second. Would you let us know if you had any follow-up questions?
No, that's great. Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you. All right, if anybody else would like to ask a question, you can press star to unmute yourself or type it in the box on the right. But wow, we've been at this for almost 2 hours. Can you believe it?
Oh my God.
It feels like 45 minutes.
Yeah. Oh man, and I could talk about dance all day and all night. It is so complex.
We'll have to
and
do
I
it
always
another
have
time
so
then.
many things running through my brain. Oh my God. I just hope
Awesome.
that my thoughts have been concise enough for you guys.
All right, looks like we've got another question from Shining.
Yeah, I have lots of them always. Kind of a follow-up.
Me too.
A follow-up with the last one, because it's something I've been wondering a lot about too. And it sounds like you were saying you kind of always liked a little sexier costume. So it sounds like you might be naturally a little bit more comfortable with that sexual quality or like your own sexuality and how it's present. But I'm really curious, like if you've had any challenges with that, and or if you have any suggestions to people, like knowing that that is a part of the industry and a part of the expectation in the entertainment and at part of the industry, right? Versus like the dance community, which doesn't necessarily expect or want that. Kind of how do you come to terms with that expectation and I don't know, feeling comfortable and safe in an environment in which that is going to be present? That makes sense?
No, it does make sense. I think it's very important for each dancer to decide first what you're comfortable with. Not just like venue-wise and like who you're presenting yourself to, but how you present yourself. It's really important to be true to yourself and not try to force something you're not comfortable with. I've always been like pretty comfortable with my body. Like I really don't mind showing skin and being expressive and being a little sexy and cheeky on stage. Every dancer developed her own like style in this way. Like stage personality is its own whole thing to talk about. And if you look at different dancers, you see such a range. Some dancers are more cutesy, some dancers are super serious and dramatic, some dancers have a sexier side, and I think that's really just based on your personality. And all of it's valid, and it works for different venues. As far as where you actually decide to go with it, again, I think has a lot to do with your comfort zone. But in my personal experience, everywhere that I've worked, you have no control in general as a woman over having crappy experiences with things like harassment in general, outside of dance. We have no control over this. You could be in a niqab and get harassed. So of course, you might not have control over that situation happening or not, but I got a lot of really good advice early on from other people in the industry, not just dancers, but singers, being like, look, I think you'll be able to avoid a lot of bad experiences if you conduct yourself in a certain way, like show up,
Shahrzad, did we lose you? The last thing I heard was show up. I wonder if we might have lost you. Okay, I think we might have lost Shahrzad. Let's give her a second and see if she reconnects. And if not, it might be a good time to call it a day. We'll see. All right, let me go ahead. All right, do we have you again?
Yeah, I think like every certain amount of time, it just like automatically, my phone's like, stop it.
That's your phone telling you it's time to go to bed, maybe. All right, so why don't I have you finish your thought and then we'll cut it off there.
That's okay. Where was I? Yeah, I've had a lot of really good suggestions from different people, and a lot of it was like stuff I didn't even think about. They're like, you can inadvertently send signals and you're not even like realizing it because this isn't your culture.
Do you have examples of what some of those things might be?
One of the funniest things that caught me off guard and happened right away was someone wanted to take a picture with me, and I was like, okay. So I like put my hand around this person, and the people that were with me were like, no, and I was like, oh my God, what did I do? What have I done? Because they reacted like really strongly, and they're like, never have a picture of you touching like a man. And I was like, wow, I never really thought of that before. Little weird stuff like that. They were like, you can send a lot of signals in little ways like that. So there might be some subconscious thing that you're doing you don't realize. Also, it helps to be careful about who you're working with and just be like really sensitive about your surroundings. Try not to go into situations you don't fully understand, like general stuff like that that should kind of be common sense, but sometimes you don't fully like think out or vet things before like jumping into them, because we're dancers and we're just like, woo, this is gonna be great. So yeah, it's definitely a complicated part of being like a commercial performer, especially in some Middle Eastern countries where there is sex work happening in a lot of the venues where dance is happening, even if they're not actually connected. Very complicated.
All right. Well, thanks, Shining. I think we had better cut this off here. I do want to acknowledge that Alyssa asked a question about what your favorite rest day activity is, but maybe we'll have to take that offline. So sorry, Alyssa. All right.
He was
And thank
trying
you
to get
so
a
much.
specific answer out of me.
Well, thank you, Shahrzad.
Thank you. And I just want to say, because sometimes I feel like I have a hard time getting my head around everything that I see. It's a lot to process. But anyway, I really hope that there was some good information here for you guys. I try to explain as much as I can, but my own opinions and perspectives and experiences change so rapidly because of all the experiences that I'm having all the time. So yeah, I don't know. It's 4 a.m. My brain is going crazy, but I just really hope that I was able to be concise and give some interesting information for you guys, and feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you. And let's thank our sponsor one more time. Once again, that's the Belly Dance Bundle. So if you want to check out the heavily discounted bundle of online belly dance products, including some stuff from me and other Clubhouse guests, you can do that at bellydancegeek.com/bundle. And we do have a giveaway with finger cymbals and my online course as part of that. But the giveaway is closing on Wednesday, September 27th at the end of the day. So if you're listening later, check this out ASAP. And our next call is coming up on Thursday, 26th. My guest, Phoenix of Denver, is going to be talking about how to use internal work to boost your stage presence. And this is the end of our call, but that doesn't mean that the conversation has to end. We've got a private Facebook group just for Clubhouse members, and I'll send out an email shortly with a link to the invitation. There is a delay for approval just to make sure that you are actually a dancer so we don't get any creepers in the group. And I'll also include a link to the call recording if you'd like to listen again, as well as a link to Shahrzad's website and a few places where you can get some of the other resources. We're also going to include a link to our feedback survey. So if you have any ideas for topics or speakers or improvements that I could make, I would love to hear from you. And the last thing I want to say is that this is the come on in kind of Clubhouse, not the no boys allowed kind. So if you know somebody who would like to join us, you can invite them at bellydancegeek.com/clubhouse. And until next time, happy dancing. Good night, everybody. Thanks for listening. For more geek-tacular resources, visit bellydancegeek.com.